5 insane prisoners that killed cellmates reacting to life sentences. 1. Jamie Osuna. Jamie Osuna, also known as the Man with a Million Faces, is a notorious criminal who committed a horrific double crime while he was already incarcerated in California's Kern County Jail. In 2011, he murdered 37-year-old Yvette Pena Reed, and in 2017, he pleaded guilty to the murder of Yvette Pena to avoid the death penalty and was given a life sentence without the option of parole or bail. During his trial, he showed no remorse and even smirked and waved to her family. And although this took 6 years, justice was ultimately served. While in prison in 2019, he dissected and cut off the head of his fellow prisoner and cellmate in the Corcoran State Prison, Luis Romero, who was 44 years old, with a makeshift knife. Luis Romero had been in jail since he was 17. He was charged with second-degree murder for shooting and killing a woman in Campton and had already spent 27 years in prison before he was transferred to the Corcoran State Prison. On Romero's arrival to Corcoran, he was put in the same cell with Jamie Osuna, who had stayed alone since his arrival to the cell. 2 days later, Romero's mutilated and dismembered body was found. Jamie had cut out one eye, chopped off a finger, removed part of his ribs and lungs, and proceeded to behead him. Upon further autopsy, it was discovered that Osuna had viciously sliced through both sides of Romero's face to create the appearance of an extended smile. When Osuna was found and about to be arrested, the guards found a necklace made from Luis Romero's body parts. Again, he did not feel remorse, and during an interview with the press, he said, "I don't have no sympathy. I'm sadistic. I really don't care."
I don't have no sympathy. I'm sadistic. I really don't care. I'll do it and I'll do it again over and over.
He was never granted a courtroom trial for killing Romero because, according to medical reports, he was diagnosed with unspecified schizophrenia spectrum, borderline personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. This was, of course, after he had been transferred to the Salinas Valley State Prison Psychiatric Inpatient Program. 2. Anthony George. Anthony George, a 32-year-old inmate, was charged with killing a fellow inmate, Adam Kargus, in October 2013. He had punched, choked, kicked, and stomped on Adam Kargus, a 29-year-old, until his death in 2013, and on the 7th of October in the same year, he was given a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Before that, he had already been in prison for murdering Tyrone Williamson in 2012. He had been together with Tyrone at a house, but was accused and thrown out for stealing Williamson's phone. George, who was drunk on alcohol and drugs, yelled at Williamson before brutally stabbing him 3 times. He was ordered a life sentence and mandated to serve at least 21 years in prison. George was known in jail as Bush, and a brewmaster who made alcohol from fermented fruit and sugar. Kargus, on the other hand, was a drug addict who had been arrested for fraud and was only jailed after he was denied bail for the continuous use of the drugs. Kargus was beaten to death for more than an hour by George, who was much bigger, in the cell they shared while both were held in the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center in London, Ontario. George had punched and kicked while pressing his face against the glass. Other inmates who had witnessed the crime cheered George on, and a few of them frantically called for the guards. The next morning, George was captured in the surveillance camera dragging Kargus's lifeless body, which had 32 visible wounds from the assault, to a shower the next morning without any of the guards noticing a thing. In court, George pleaded guilty and said that Kargus's murder was unintentional.
I don't understand what happened. Like, I consider Adam a friend. He should have never been in that situation. I should have never been in that situation.
George's guilty plea, his own troubled life, and his First Nations background persuaded Justice Bruce Thomas to give him the earliest chance at parole, which is after 10 years, and to recommend that he receive Indigenous-based counseling in prison. At his sentencing, George apologized several times to Kargus's family, but while some forgave him, others could not. 3. Stephen Sanderson. In 1988, Stephen Sanderson was convicted of murdering his girlfriend and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, 24 years later, Sanderson committed another brutal crime while he was behind bars. He murdered Theodore Dyer, who was his bunkmate and fellow inmate in the Michigan prison where he was serving his sentence. Dyer had previously been given a 25 to 50-year sentence for child molestation that involved penetration, and Sanderson's motive for his double crime was that Dyer was allegedly trying to justify his actions. This was too much for Sanderson to bear, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. During his trial, he willingly confessed that he hit Theodore Dyer a few times in the face before wrapping Dyer's shoelaces around his neck and taking his life. He He went on to say that he felt no remorse for his actions, stating that he had only set up an appointment between Theodore and God. Also, he denounced the claim people made about him being a hero and said that he only did what he thought was best in the time he was given.
Since this all happened, it's kind of been, people think I'm some kind of hero when I'm actually not. I just, did what I thought was best in the time that I was given.
In court, Sanderson pleaded guilty to the murder of Dyer without hesitation, and the judge presiding over the case, Judge Bouchard, sentenced Sanderson to life in prison with the possibility of parole, which he could only serve if he probably reincarnates after completing his original life sentence for murdering his girlfriend. 4. Christian Gonzalez. In a shocking turn of events, Christian Gonzalez, a 24-year-old detainee at Cook County Jail, has been charged with first-degree murder in connection with the beating death of his cellmate, 19-year-old Pedro Ruiz. The two were documented members of rival gangs, with Gonzalez belonging to the Satan Disciple Street Gang and Ruiz is a member of the Latin Saints Gang. He had hit Ruiz with an improvised weapon made from bars of soap placed inside a sock and dragged him, Ruiz, by his hair around the cell. Gonzalez had already been in jail since June 12, 2019, following his arrest on attempted murder, aggravated battery, and discharge of a firearm, and illegal possession of firearms. He was being held without bail after allegedly using an assault-style rifle to shoot a father and his son in 2017. According to court records, Gonzalez and another suspect stepped out of a car and opened fire, hitting the victim at least twice before he was taken to Stroger Hospital by an acquaintance. This left the father with several wounds on his leg and hip, and his son with a bullet graze from one of the 11 shots that had been fired at them. In an earlier incident, video footage obtained by CBS 2 shows Gonzalez was involved in a brutal attack that left another detainee hospitalized. After the beating, the footage shows Gonzalez throwing a joker card from a deck of playing cards onto the victim's lifeless body, indicating the existence of ongoing feuds within the jail. 5. Christopher Scarver. In 1990, Christopher Scarver, who was part of a job training program with the Wisconsin Conservative Corps, committed his first known crime when he murdered his former coworker, Stephen Lohman. He was fired from his job with the Corps in 1990, and in response to losing his job, he returned to his former workplace with a gun in his hand and requested money from Lohman, his former supervisor. But when Lohman refused his request, Scarver retrieved his gun and shot Lohman thrice in his head. Scarver was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was then sent to the Walpen Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, where he would later meet the infamous serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. On November 28, 1994, Scarver and Dahmer were both assigned to work in the prison gymnasium. Scarver had reportedly heard about Dahmer's gruesome crimes from other inmates and had become increasingly agitated in Dahmer's presence. During his trial, he entered the courtroom singing and pleaded no contest to the murders.
Rain or shine, sharing your dreams, your heart and your mind.
So he was sentenced to 2 additional life sentences with his eligibility date set for the year 3077. So, these incidents are a total reminder of the importance of mental health care and support for inmates, as well as the need for effective rehabilitation programs to reduce recidivism and give prisoners hope for a better future.